Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry we are a bit late today, but hope all of you are having a great Sunday so far. Yes, and today we are going to talk about another US stock with FINANCIALmissy.
Hello, hello. Hey guys, nice meeting you guys again.
Yes, yeah, we are going to talk about this particular stock called New Holdings, right? Ticker symbol NU. And this was specially requested by one of our audiences, right? I think it's Kel, right? Yep. So today we are going to go and dive deep into this particular stock. Right. So without further ado, let's kickstart our session. And perhaps I'll start. Sure, I'll start first. Yep. And FINANCIAlmissy will cover the rest in the second part. Right. So let me share my slides. All right. Yes. Okay. So today we're going to talk about this particular stock called New Holdings, right? So it has, it was a recent IPO stock, right? That has since been battered. Right? It has fallen ever since it IPO just recently. Right? In fact, it has dropped about more than 65% since its IPO price. Right? So maybe that's why Cal is looking at this, right, and seeing whether this stock is an attractive point to buy now. So let's go deep and dive deep into this particular stock. But before we go into the details, if you are here with us, right, don't forget to give this video a like so that we know that you are here live with us. And as what we always do every week, I'll first go through our past sharing, right, for our previous stock pick, which is none other than Tesla, right? We covered that last week. And that was also on a special request by one of our audience member. Right, and if you haven't caught it already, you can go back to our last week video. It's on FINANCIAlmissy's Facebook page. So let's do a quick recap, right, of what I have covered for Tesla last week, right? Then here are just some of the 5 things that I pointed out last week, and it's summarized on my TikTok channel, right? So let's quickly do a brief recap. Right, so I'll mention the 5 things, right? The first thing was this long-term uptrend line on the weekly chart, right? And it actually went below that long-term uptrend line just recently. And on the daily chart, like a shorter time frame, we are looking at this horizontal support, right? It seems like there was some support in the first support, and we could be looking at second support if it falls down further. Right, and we also talked about this downtrend line, right, on the daily chart, and it was still currently trading below that line then, right? So we weren't quite sure whether it would break past it. And we also point out on this horizontal resistance, right? Something to watch if there's a bounce in prices, right? And last but not least, the fifth thing you mentioned was the MACD, right? It was negative, right? It was steadily negative, and if that continues, there could be more bearish momentum, right? So if you want to find the full details, you can catch last week's video, or can just head on down to my TikTok channel for the full video with the music, right? So what we mentioned then, right? What I mentioned last week, right? On Tesla, on the technical side of things, is that there are both bull and bear arguments, right? On the bull side of things, there is the first horizontal support seems to be convincingly supported, right? But on the bear side of things, there looks to be that long-term uptrend line looks to have been broken, right? On the weekly chart, it is still trading below the downtrend line on the daily chart, and the daily MACD is still negative, right? It's still steady negative. So at that time, we mentioned on a trading idea, right, for Tesla. And what we mentioned then was, if you want to take a long position, right, we do have to wait and see first to see if the price eventually breaks above that long-term uptrend line. It also has to be convincingly supported, and the MACD has to be positive, right? But on the short side of things, right, if the first horizontal support actually breaks down convincingly, right, and the MACD continues to be negative, we could initiate a short position, which means to sell first and buy back later. So let's take a look at what happened for Tesla ever since then, right? So this is the updated price chart, right, for Tesla, right, in this particular week. So first of all, right, on this on the weekly chart as well, right, you can see that it continues to trade below that long-term uptrend line, right? This bar is that basically the wick, right? The bar that's generated from this week, right? And you can see that it just continues to go below this line even further, right? And the horizontal support, right, that was drawn out last week as well. So the first horizontal support at US dollar 700. So it traded above this line, right, for an entire week until, you can see this one bar over here, right, that is corresponding to Friday, right, on the 20th of May. So it was supported all the way until Friday. Friday it had this long red bar where it actually broke below this horizontal support very convincingly, right? And you can see that on the day itself, on Friday, it actually approached, the second horizontal support that was pointed out, right? Almost hitting it on that single day itself. The downtrend line, right? So as you know, the bearish momentum continued this week, right? You can see that the price continued to trade below that downtrend line. And of course, we didn't see a bounce in prices, so this horizontal resistance is not tested yet. MACD continued to be negative for this entire week as well, right? We saw it last week, it continued to be so this week as well, with the bearish momentum continuing. In summary, right, if you follow that trading idea, right, that I suggested last week, we could have initiated that short position, right, on Friday upon seeing that first support breaking convincingly, right, and seeing that the MACD continues to be negative, right? And what's the results, right? If we have actually followed that idea, right, we could have been in some unrealized profits already, right? In fact, you could have even taken profits on that day itself, right? At one point, it was about 8.3% in unrealized profits, right? Where the price actually hit a low of 633, right? The second support was at 625 thereabouts. Right, so that is some good unrealized profits, right? With some, just using some technical indicators, for this particular stock. Yep, and that's some good money. And that's if you have been holding this position, right? Let's see whether it will eventually hit that target price of 625 US dollars. Right, so that's a quick recap, right, of Tesla. And if you like what I've been sharing so far, don't forget to click that like or love button. Yep, and without further ado, let's move on to today's stock pick. Today's stock pick is none other than New Holdings, right? NU, ticker symbol NU, right? It's requested by Kel. So here's Nu's Holdings price chart, right? So you can see this is it recently just IPO, just in December, right? And ever since then, right? In fact, the first day price is highest price ever. Ever since then, it has fallen down and never hit that day one price ever since, right? And in fact, recently it hit a fresh new low. So you can see that on 9 December it IPO, right? It actually hit a high of $12.24, right? And fast forward to today, 20th of May, right? Actually that's last Friday, right? It actually closed at US dollars 3.81, right? So that's a more than 65% drop, right? That's a tremendous drop in price. And of course, the big question here is again, why, right? Why did this happen? Why is this stock so bearish? Let's take a look, right, at some news for this particular stock, right? To see what exactly are the news surrounding this particular stock, right? So first of all, right, this is taken from Bloomberg, right? Bloomberg.com, and in this article, it actually mentions that this particular stock, New Bank, actually tumbles, right, as the end of fintech 26 billion lockup looms, right? So some background, right? So actually, this particular stock, right, there is a hold up period, right? Because it just it just IPO. So all those like major stakeholders, right, they can't sell the shares until just recently, right? So there's a lockup period, right? And it is, the lockup period just ended very recently. Right, so that's the background, and let's start. So basically, right, in the article it mentioned about this massive stock lockup, right, and it's actually so this particular stock, right, this particular stock is Brazil-based stock, right? It has basically fallen. Why did it fell? Over here I offer some hints, right? Basically, the whole macroeconomic outlook, that's one, right? Because there is a global rout in tech stocks, right? And this is also this stock itself is also related in that particular sector. Right, and the other concern here is whether this particular company, right, can actually deliver on the promised growth, right, as the credit quality deteriorates in Brazil, right. So that's that inherent risk that investors are worried about, right. So here it mentions the stock lockup, right, more details on stock lockup, and that's about $26 billion in shares, right, and they the lockup period actually ended on May the 17th, right. In fact, this particular stock also just released its first quarter results, right? And we shall cover that later, right, in the subsequent section, right? So this is also a potential risk, right? Because with the stock lockup period ending, right, founders and other stakeholders might start to sell their holdings, right, and that might cause the price to crash even further, right? This is something that it was mentioned, right, as one of the key risks by one of the analysts, right? They're thinking that if this really materialize, right, if people really sell all their holdings after the end of lockup period, right, this could really put pressure on the particular stock price, right? In fact, they mentioned that this amount released, it represents over 90%, right, 90% of the total shares, right? And this is actually the third and final window to end the lockup, right? The previous two, periods, there wasn't any much action, right? So this is actually the last window, right? But of course, right, there could be that silver lining, right, where the founders, investors are still very bullish about this stock and will still hold on to their holdings, right? And that could actually cause the price to show some support, right? Right, but the loss in value, right, of these shares does lead to short confidence, at least in the short term, right? So let's take a look at other articles, right, or rather more details on this article, right, and to see what other news there is for this particular stock. Right, so Nubank also said that it is focused on long-term growth and creating value for shareholders, right? So these are the typical story, right, that a company should tell all investors, right? But whether this is true, right, whether they are indeed seeking long-term quality investors, creating value, that remains to be seen. Right, and more details of why it actually fell, right? As mentioned, the global rout of the Fed, hiking interest rates, right? That put pressure on high growth tech firms, right? And also the firm's outlook, right, with Brazil hurting by the surging inflation and higher interest rates. Right, but on the plus side of things for this company, right, it has actually won about 53 million customers in Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia. Right, that is quite an achievement, right, and it has some comparative advantage as well. Right, it has sold a range of financial products allowing cheaper fees and less red tape. Right, and this is something that is pretty unique, right, in Brazil, right, where actually a large chunk of population is actually unbanked. And the banks itself have usually high fees and a lot of red tape, right? So they are trying to disrupt the situation over in Brazil, right? And over in our article, right, this on fools.com, right, it also talks about Nu Holdings, right? In fact, this particular company, right, it is backed by this particular guy, right? I'm sure all of you know him, Warren Buffett, right? And because it is seen as a digital bank disruptor, right, in Latin America, right? So it's trying to make access to financial services easier and less costly, right, as compared to traditional Brazilian banks, right, as what was mentioned in the previous article. Right, and this company is growing very quickly, right? 54 million customers, last quarter, right? That's similar number as what quoted previously, right, in the previous article, right? And it also has an incredibly low customer acquisition cost of roughly $5, right? And this is possibly one of the lowest in the industry, right? There's another competitive advantage, right, this company has. Right, over on the another article, right, to give more background on this particular stock, right, this from thestreet.com, right, it talks more about new holdings as well, right. It offers more details on why it has fallen, right. One of the things it mentioned here, the prospect of defaults in Latin America, right, and that could have the possibility of driving this particular stock's expenses higher, right. And of course, you also mentioned about the whole macroeconomic outlook, right, of rising global interest rates, right, and that might restrict ability to continue accelerating its growth. Right, but there are some plus points as well. But here, this article mentioned more plus points that was not mentioned before. But one of the things is that this company has signed a deal, right, with blockchain fintech Pecos Trust, right. So with that, right, with this deal, right, it has the provision of providing customers with crypto trading services, right. So crypto is like the in thing nowadays, and it is also hopping on this bandwagon, right. Particularly for its blue chip coins, right, such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. Right, but of course, one thing to note, right, that is that this new partnership, right, is not expected to be seen, right, not immediately, probably several quarters from now in its financial statement, right. So that's something to take note, right. It's not going to be something you're going to see in the short term, right. You might want to be careful about that. Right, and another thing, right, that is a bit less positive about this stock, right, is that the board of directors for this company, right, has recently come under fire for investors, right. Right, actually, it has increased its compensation, right, by about 20%, right, to more than 34.5 million. Right, that's something investors are not very happy about because this company is still loss making, right. It's still loss making, but it's still paying its directors, CEOs a huge sum of money, right. So that is something that people are not very happy about, right. In fact, this rate is above average, right, for traditional profitable Brazilian banks, right. But of course, the company also said that this is justified, right, because they have some aggressive targets to meet, right. So that's something you want to take note as well, right. All right, and this article also mentioned about macroeconomic outlook, right, being unfavorable for fintechs, right. So it has not just affected new holdings but other big fintech names, right, like Sophie, PAGS, right, all these companies as well. Right. So one thing to take note, right, fintech companies, during the pandemic period, right, during the COVID pandemic, right, it did enjoy quite a bit of euphoria, right. Right, because everyone's staying, right. But nowadays we are moving out of the pandemic, right. Although COVID is still here, right, but we are less scared of it, right. People are not going back to office, right. They're not staying at home majority of the time, right. There is not a lot of lockdown in most part of the world, right. We are returning back to normality. So this this kind of trend, right, has actually cooled significantly, right. And with that, e-commerce, crypto trading, all these has also cooled down as well. Right. And the Fed, right, the Fed itself, right, has also pivoted towards a less dovish stance on inflation, right. Interest rates have been rising, right, and all this has hampered high growth stocks, right, as we all know already. Right, and let's look at what some analysts have to say about new holdings. See new holdings in a positive light, right? It sees it as a disruptive fintech, right, that can take advantage of low and middle income markets, right, especially in the Latin America region. Right, and it actually sees that this company, right, together with Sophie, right, is one of the two standout companies within a competitive landscape, but due to the depth, breadth of the assets and capabilities. So in short, it sees huge potential with this particular company. Right, but of course, as what was mentioned time and again, right, the problem here, right, could be the Brazilian economy having an impact on this stock, right? So that's something to take note of. Right, another analyst right, also wrote his view for this particular stock, and he actually sees, he sees in a more pessimistic light. Right, he sees that this company has no margin forever, right, because he sees that its valuation multiples is actually stretched, right. And one thing is, as mentioned, the Brazilian economy is precarious. Right, you also see challenges for this company in efforts to monetize its considerable customer base in the long term. Right. Right. Another thing that is mentioned here, right, for the analyst is that the default levels in the Brazilian market impose a significant risk. Right. So its eventual need to curb its lending could slow its pace of monetization and decelerate growth heading into 2023. Right. So there are both potential and risks with this stock. Right. So we do have to take note and be careful, if we are actually going to invest in this for the long term, right? Right, and another piece of news I'd like to share with from investing.com, right? This is actually more positive light. Very recently, this particular stock actually soared 10%, right? Very recently, right? A few days ago, and that's actually on the back of their first quarter results, right? So as mentioned, you remember just now I mentioned that it just released its first quarter results, right? And this was the day where it released, right, on the 17th of May. So the revenue that came in, right, was actually good, right? Revenue was higher than the estimated amount of 630.9 million, right? In fact, it was a whopping 200 plus million more, right? 877.2 million. Right, and that's right. The clients, right? The clients, it also increased, right? There was a client addition about 5.7 million, right? To hit a 59.6 million clients, right? So all this is very positive for this stock. It actually showed that there is still strong growth for this particular stock. Right, so that it also addressed the risks, right? All the risks that were mentioned, right? The company also addressed this, and the bigger question of comfort level to continue to pursue aggressive growth also up. So I think I lost connection. Oh yes. So the company also answered that on the back of historical track record. Right. He answered that right. So they do expect solid growth to continue. Right, and after the first quarter result, there were some analysts that also kick in, right? They also talk about what their views on this particular stock, right? And one of the analysts said that there was much to like about its results, like including a continuation of strong client acquisition and engagement, operating leverage gains, which supported a bottom line beat. Right, but you also mentioned some concerns like asset quality deterioration or sharper than expected, right? And also higher than anticipated provision changes and lower reserve coverage, right? And also we talk about the lockup expiry, right? That was mentioned just now. So there is some pressure that will be on this stock, right? But hopefully, right, most of the shareholders will not be selling. And you can see from the price chart, right, that ever since the lockup had ended, right, the price didn't really tank that much. So there could be some hope that the shareholders are not crashing out after the lockup period has ended. Right. So I did delve into a lot of detail, right, in some of the background for this particular stock, right? Hopefully you have gleaned something out of it. But Let's just all those in. Right, you shall look in some of the technicals for new holdings, right? And let's see what this company, right? What the technicals, would suggest to us about this particular company. Right, but before I do so, right, before I jump to the details, if you like what I've been sharing so far, right, don't forget to hit that like or love button. Right, and now let's move on to the price chart for more details. Right, okay, so first of all, right, I bring you back to the chart for new holdings, right? This is a daily chart, right? I added in more indicators, right? And let's go through them one by one. So first of all, we have this downtrend line, right, drawn on a daily chart, and you can see that the price is so far, right, it has so far been trading below this downtrend line, right? You can see that it is tested before, but it's still the resistance point, and it has yet to break this downtrend line. Right? So in order to see upside, in order to see this stock, breaking out for the for a bullish reversal, right, we have to see that this downtrend line is broken convincingly, right? That is the first thing we have to take note of. Right, and if it actually breaks out from that downtrend line, right, we could be looking at these resistance levels, right? So the first resistance level, right, it was tested in the past, right, over here, and that is corresponding to the US dollar of $5, right? And if that breaks, right, we could be looking at second resistance level, right? We used to be the support, right, previously, right? At about 5.8 to 5.9 US dollars. Right, so this is something to watch out for if we see a bounce in prices for new holdings. Right, but on the downside, right, we do have to watch out for any break in the support levels, right? And let's point out two horizontal supports, right? First support is where it's tested now, right, which is at about US dollars 3.6. Right, it seems like there is some support at this level, right? But we shall see whether this can be strongly and convincingly supported, right? Slightly lower support level which is tested in the past over here, which is about 3.3 US dollars, right? And this is something to watch if the first horizontal support actually breaks convincingly. Right, and the fourth thing to take note of for new holdings is that the volume, right? You see the volume chart over here, right? It has been increasing lately, right? And it's accompanied, right, with ranging prices, right? Price is actually trading within this range down here. So what this could imply is that it could imply that prices could be bottoming out, right? But we definitely need to see some further confirmation, right, before we can conclude that it has indeed bottomed out. Right, and on the plus side of things as well, right, we also see that the MACD, right, on the daily chart, right, the MACD has also narrowed its negative gap, right, and it has actually just made a crossover, right, it just touched, here, and you can see it just made a crossover. So if this continues and the MACD becomes, moves in the positive region, right, that could be the confirmation of an impending price reversal, right? So that's something to take note of as well. Right, so that's the 5 things to take note of. And in summary, right, there are both the bull and bear arguments for new holdings. Right, on the bull side of things, right, it appears to be supported by that first horizontal support level at about US dollars 3.6. Right, and we also saw that increasing volume with ranging prices. Right, and the daily MACD has also made a crossover. Right, but on the bear side of things, right, is that we haven't seen the downtrend line being broken out. Right, the price is still trading below that downtrend line, right? It's still resisted by it, right? And also, right, in recent times, right, the market is still very volatile, right? You can see at the broader market, right, the S&P 500, the Dow index, they've all been correcting down, right? In fact, the S&P 500 has also reached a bearish territory, right, just last Friday. Right, so there's something to take note of, right? If the whole macro economy is not doing too good, but it could also affect the individual stocks as well. So what should we do for trading? Right, so at this point, I'd like to mention once again that this is my own opinion. Please do your own due diligence, right, before entering this stock. So my suggestion here is actually, to wait till that downtrend line is crossed convincingly, right? Before thinking of placing a buy or long entry, right? Of course, you also want to see the other confirmation signs, right? Such as the horizontal support holding convincingly, right? And the MACD also crossing over to the positive region, right? So if you actually see that first horizontal resistance level of $5, right, clearing convincingly, right, we could consider adding more longs, right? But if it doesn't, right, that is the resistance point, then we could take profit at that level, right? And if it clears that first horizontal resistance, we could be looking at the second horizontal resistance level at $5.8 US, right? Here's another suggested stop loss price, right? Which is actually can set it below that second horizontal support at about US$3.2. Yep, and if actually the stock doesn't go up but it goes down, right, and it breaks that second horizontal support level, right, then we do have to wait till the next support is found before we think about buying this stock, right, because it could fall down further. Right, so that's my quick take, right, of what I think of new holdings, right? And if you like my sharing for today, don't forget to hit that like or love button, right? As well as share this video, right, so that more people can benefit from our sharing today. Right, and if you're joining us for the first time, right, do follow us on our social media pages. Right, I have a variety of social media. You can follow me on these 4 platforms over here, right? Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok channel. And you can also follow FINANCIAlmissy if you haven't done so already. Right, and you can leave some comments, right, on what you think, right, and also leave a suggestion, right, of what's the next stop for our next sharing. Right, and we do this every Sunday at around 4 p.m. Right, if you haven't know already. Right, and I also shared this last week, but I'd like to share this with all of you in case some of you are watching this for the first time, right? So the market is still very volatile, right? We still have to trade or invest with caution, right? So this is my my own 7 steps, right, on how to weather the market volatility, right? Which I think is very relevant, and you might want to actually take a look, right? Go on down to my PayHip store. Yep, you can download it for free, right, on there. So I'll attach the link right after this video ends as well. And last but not least, right, I'm also going to do another Facebook Live this evening at 9:30 p.m. right, on the Cryptoverse NFT Facebook group, right. So today I'm actually going to talk about both Bitcoin and gold, right. So I'm talking about gold, right, as a possible hedge, right, for possible economic downturn, right, and what to watch out for Bitcoin, right, for the past week and for the future, right. So if you're interested, right, you might consider trying watching this Facebook Live later if you are free and available. Right, it'll be at 9:30 p.m. on the Cryptoverse NFT Investor Facebook group. Right, and with that, come to the end of my presentation. I would like to hand over time, back to FINANCIAlmissy, right, for her take on new holdings. Right, over to you, FINANCIAlmissy.
Hey, thanks, Trey and Junior. Thank you for your awesome sharing and the awesome recap on Tesla that happened last week. Right. So, hey guys, FINANCIAlmissy here. I'm very happy to see you guys on a Sunday evening. Kind of forget about the timing, because I just came back from overseas as well. That's why you look at me. I'm a bit more tan than usual, but it's all right. Okay, so today we are going to talk about new holdings, like what the trade engineer actually mentioned, and he actually gave us a very good overview about all the news and what's not. So I'm pretty sure that you guys actually benefited a lot from his sharing, and I shall not repeat what he just shared, right? So without further ado, let me just show you what I've got for you guys. But today I'm doing it a bit different. Reason being, right? Let me show you first. Yeah, let me share my screen. Screen share one. Yeah, this is the one. Okay. So today I have no PowerPoint slides for you guys. I just wanted to do it more impromptu to actually, show you guys what is new holdings. Let me see whether I got it up. Yes, okay. What is new holding all about? Is it a bank or is it a fintech, right? Okay. So new holding itself is actually more of fintech. Look at this description on Yahoo Finance. New Holdings Limited operates as a digital finance service platform and technology company. All right. From this statement itself, we know that it's more of fintech kind of basis, and it operates primarily in Brazil, Mexico, Colombia. Okay. I do not know how many of you guys knows about Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, or countries in the Latin America. But for me, at least, I'm not sure about the regulations. I'm not sure about the whole systemic organization there. So for me personally, as an investor, I would not want to dip my feet into this company. All right, because I know nothing about this geographical region. And New Holdings, although it's a digital financial service platform technology company of which has potential to grow, actually there's one more thing about New Holdings is that it is actually one of the fastest growing company fintech company in the Latin America. But then I do not know how is the regulations going to go about. And as we all know, right, regulation plays a very big part in how a company is going to be operated. Yeah, guys. So before you guys do any investment, you need to know what is the business model, how does the business operate. All right. Let's look further. It offers new credit cards, debit services, okay, mobile payment solutions, blah blah blah. Then you talk about everyday purchases through the mobile phone, savings solution, personal account, digital account, blah blah blah. Then look at new invest, of which at the bottom I saw something about new insurance. All right. So come on, guys. What does this remind you? You know, at first glance, when I look at this whole description about New Holdings Limited, right, the first thing I thought about is probably DBS, what's that thing called? Privilege. Is it DBS privilege? The external arm of DBS that helps to do, you know, investment insurance and what's not, you know, or OCBC, you know, that kind of thing. Essentially, what is so special about this company? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what is so special about this company, because to me it seems like it's so common, right? As you read the description, maybe in that particular country it is not common yet they don't provide such services. That's something that I personally do not know. Hence, for me, it's out of my circle of competency, and this is something that I will not want to consider. That's the first thing, yeah. And this company was founded in 2013, but it only IPO in 2021, December 8th, all right? Of which during IPO, right, the initial price that was being set up, right, is actually $9. And they give it a range like $8 to $9 for it to fluctuate and stuff like that. But it started at $9, all right? So let us see how much is this company right now. New Holding. On Friday itself, it closed at $3.81. You guys, this is a lot of losses. Okay. Warren Buffett is one of the major shareholder of this company. Can afford to lose, right? Although this pricing is very cheap. Okay. Is this a risk that, as investors like us, is this a risk that we want to undertake? It's a question that we want to ask ourselves. Is this a good investment? Are we able to accept the risk there? And for how long do we want to hold this stock? What if this stock doesn't fly? And what if this stock flies? This is something that we do not know. Will Warren Buffett make mistakes? From historical transaction shows, right? Yes, he does make mistakes. All right. So if you want, you need to actually know your own strategy, your own conviction, in order to know whether it is actually a company that you want to follow the rules. Okay. Don't go in blindly. It's something that is very important. Yeah. All right. So let me just show you another thing. Let me go to the stats. Okay. New holdings are number two reason why I wouldn't consider new holding, right? Is because it is a penny stock. right, guys? So penny stock, right, is actually defined as when the stock price is less than $5. So typically, right, penny stocks are not listed. They are only being traded over the counters because they don't have much volatility and stuff. I mean, they have high volatility, but they don't have much transactions going on, and they don't want to actually, be subjected to the regulation of the trade exchanges. Okay, but one thing about new holding, right, is actually listed in NYSE, which is okay. That means they are subjected to regulations. They have all the checks in place. But what for us investors, what you want to buy is the value of the company, all right? Not being determined the price by the price. Okay. The price is what we get, yeah. Okay, the price is what we pay, sorry. The price is what we pay. The value is what we get. Okay. Don't say that it's very cheap, you can put $100 lah, then like it's nothing. But ultimately, do you want to take unnecessary risk? It's something that you need to ask yourself. Okay. Nevertheless, penny stock is typically have high volatility. The company, in terms of company financials, might not be there as well. That so I mean stuff like that. So penny stocks, as much as possible, as beginner investors, I would highly suggest you guys to keep away. Why? Because it can be very volatile. It can go bust. It can grow. Nobody knows. Okay, there's not much of a good valuation to base on, especially when it's just IPO. Okay, look at the market cap. Market cap is not bad. 17.61 billion is a big cap, but look at the price. 3.81. Okay. 3.81. Oh, very cheap. All right. Then we look at further down. You see, because it's just IPO, there's not much of valuation that I can see. PG ratio not applicable. Price to book 3.97. Just means that it might be a bit overvalued there above. But then when we look further downwards, right? Profit margin negative, negative. Operating margin negative. Oh, okay. Return of equity, return of asset, return of equity, everything negative. Then we look further down, revenue 1.04 billion. But if you look into the trend of this particular company year on year, it's actually fluctuating, right? Gross profit currently still positive, but then it's still on a fluctuating basis. There's not much of a conviction as an investor to actually go into this particular company. Diluted earning per share, EPS, earning per share, yeah. That means for every share that you own, you're actually losing money. Guys, as investors out there, yeah, if you want to do a business, are you okay to actually lose money before you all earn money, or are you guys wanting to invest in a company, or you guys want to actually put at least one cent at least 1 cent in your pocket, right? Especially when something that is not very well established, you want to at least have the conviction, the confidence and conviction to actually be inside the particular company itself, right? Look at the balance sheet. The total debt to equity. Oh, the company owes a lot of money, right? Fintech, growing fintech, startup, I wouldn't be surprised. But 7.69 is actually a very high value. Okay. Current ratio 0.7, which means it says in terms of the balance sheet wise, it's more or less a more undervalued company. But regardless, if it's an empty shell, regardless of whether it's undervalued, overvalued, think twice before entering, yeah. Operating cash flow negative. Gosh. All right, and then what else can I show you guys here? Actually, nothing much lah, because nothing really that this particular company can show considering just IPO. Okay, there's no dividends per se, nothing being paid out yet. All right, so we don't know, but if for investors out there, if you really want to actually enter this company, you really need to be very cautious and to see whether it actually, coincides between the company trend as well as the overall fintech consensus. Then let's look at S&P 500 first, yeah? Okay, S&P 500, right? Oh, sorry. Let me close this. It's very interesting. Okay. S&P 500 very interesting. Look at this. Very simply, simple moving average 50 over 150. You can see that currently 50 is still below 150. The blue line is above purple line in essence. Why I put it in this way? Because purple is my favorite lah. So purple must be on top in order to see it to be bullish. And whereas when you see it's bottom, that means it's bearish lah. Huh? I use my own personal color, favorite color to actually represent. So in terms of simple moving average, you know that the momentum currently, right, is still negative, yeah? But then if I draw these lines for you guys, let me show you some magic. Sorry, yeah, my computer's a bit lag. A lot of information that's been running at the back end. Okay, let me draw this line here for you. So you currently see no change. The higher high is getting lower and lower, which means to say lower highs lah. Sorry. And then let me put another line for you guys. You see this particular line? This particular line is very interesting. On this particular date itself, which is on the 12th of May, you see this green candlestick, right? Opens here, close here. Here forms the basis of opening. Then you kind of pushed up, right? And then you look at 19th of May. 19th of May is a doji, okay? Because the body is super small. You can't even see the body, right? Open at the same price, close at the same price. And whereas on 20th of May, you see that this is a red candlestick being pushed up. And look at the price that it closed. Do you see a very interesting trend here? If I draw one line at where it opens and closes, do you guys see a converging pattern here? It will converge. Whether it will break higher or lower, nobody knows. But this is a candlestick pattern that you want to actually observe to see whether there's actually a potential entry point after it reaches this crossover. All right, very interesting. Very interesting. Although the simple moving average haven't had anything, right? But then this is a indicator that you want to watch out. Let me show you another one. Fibonacci. Fibonacci I like to do here. I was looking at this just now. It's very interesting. Even for Fibonacci, right? Normally for Fibonacci, we wanted to see whether there's a potential turning point and what's not. But look at this. Currently, it's close to 1.6. Sorry, 1.618. Okay. So in Fibonacci extension, right? 162% is where you want to look at to see whether there's actually a reversal of trend. Okay. Could there be a potential entry point in the next week? I cannot guarantee you, but something that you guys want to see whether is there any potential trade and what's not. So you guys out there, I'm not suggesting that you guys should enter S&P anytime soon, but I wanted you to actually take note that there might be an opportunity to actually see for yourself and execute based on your strategy. Okay, next week's a very interesting week. We shall see what will turn up next week and discuss about it next Sunday. All right. Okay, and then if I move back to NU, right? Sorry, my computer really very laggy today. Okay, hello. Move it. Yeah, NU. Okay, so for NU, right, the chart is this small. I also don't really know what I'm supposed to see. But then, nevertheless, let me just open it up. IPO here, $9 plus, or it went up all the way to 12.24. Lowest is $10. Okay, on the first day, and now it ended up here 3.81. It's a huge drop. Although it's very cheap, but it's a huge drop. All right. You see here, this part is a very strong ceiling. Okay. So in order for this particular stock, right, to actually go back up to be more profitable, right, you need to ride on the trend of momentum. All right. For this particular stock, I didn't even bother to put SMA 50 over 150 because there's no point. To do that. But you see here is one resistance point. Okay, to see whether the stock can even beat this resistance point, right? Here is another resistance point. Here is yet another resistance point, and here is yet another resistance point. So for this particular stock, there's a lot of resistance point for the stock to actually beat in order to see whether this company has a higher momentum to grow higher. So if you guys out there who don't really know how to read candlesticks, who doesn't really know the growth potential of this particular stock, I would suggest to actually keep away from penny stock. Really do your own due diligence to exactly know how do you play penny stock, because there's a lot of people who plays penny stocks, and then there's always this buy and dump syndrome because it's cheap, everybody can goes in, all right, and causes high volatility for this stock. I do not want any of you guys to get burned. So if you guys who actually consider to enter this one, please, 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 please do your own due diligence, all right? Because why? You guys are always right. All right. So without further ado, let me share my last slide, the last slide that I have prepared for you guys. Wait, let me see how I do this. Oh, let me share this last slide. Okay. So as mentioned, and I've been introducing you guys weekly, right? I am having this investment strategy revealing tonight at 8 p.m. where I'm going to talk about this PS Let's Mint strategy to actually teach you guys how do we achieve financial freedom. And of course travel for free lah, considering the fact that I just come back from Phuket, I didn't pay for my airfare, I didn't pay for my accommodation, I didn't pay for my food. What a wonderful trip that I've been on. So if you guys are interested, just scan the QR code and I'll see you guys tonight at 8 p.m. with bonuses at the end of the session. Right. So I think if I'm not wrong, tickets are running out maybe about 2 or 3 left. I'm not too sure, I didn't check. So if you guys are free tonight, why not join me for a session? So I will see you guys tonight. And that is all that I have for my sharing.
All right, great. Yep. So for those of you who haven't, are free tonight, don't forget to join FINANCIAlmissy in her online session this evening, right, at 8 p.m. And you're free after that, you can also come on down, at 9:30, to hear what I have to say for crypto, for Bitcoin as well as gold. Right. And with that, right, I think we have come to the end of today's session. Right, thanks everyone for tuning in this Sunday afternoon. Right, and I hope all you have a good Sunday, good remaining Sunday ahead. Right, so see you guys, next week, next Sunday, right, at the same time, right, for our next US stock pick. Right, see you guys, right, and
See you
have a nice
guys.
day.
If you guys have any
Bye.
question, just type below as well. We will answer
Yep.
you guys whenever we can. All right.
Yes.
See you.
And don't forget to, leave a comment on what's the next topic you would like us to share, right, next week. Yep. So see you guys. Yep. And have a good Sunday. Bye-bye.
Bye.